The Pittsburgh Pirates bullpen struggles plagued the 2024 season from being a competitive one. How does this unit get better from 2024 going into 2025? We're going to discuss on today's episode of Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. I am your host, Ethan Smith. I've been doing this show now for 4 seasons. Next year will be number 5 for me here on the Locked On Pirates podcast, where I bring you all of your news, analysis, opinions, reactions, and everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode, I believe, we got to pull it back up, is brought to you by Game Time. Make sure you use Game Time for all of your ticketing needs this fall and winter. The Steelers obviously have 2 home games in prime time coming up. So if you want a deal, use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. I am back in the humble abode of Pennsylvania. Vacation was good. Sorry for the lack of episodes from me down there. I was trying to get them done, but it just was too difficult with where I was staying, what I was doing. But as you see, the background is back. The lights are back. Ethan is back home. We're talking about the bullpen today. So the last time I spoke with all of you, we discussed the starting rotation, just how good the starting rotation can be. The unit itself is just only going to get better. I mean, you look at Paul Skeens, you look at Jared Jones, you look at Mitch Keller, you look at Luis Ortiz, Bailey Falter. Then you have the guys on the way like Bubba Chandler, Hunter Barco, Thomas Harrington. There we go. Mike Burrows, even potentially a Braxton Ashcraft. You have all of those guys on the way. The bullpen, though, this season was a disappointment. Period. It was just a disappointment for this team. And it was a unit that I will even admit, I said when they got Aroldis Chapman in free agency, and we'll talk more about Chapman later in the show, that when they got him, that the trio of Colin Holderman, Aroldis Chapman, and David Bednar had the potential to be a top 10 unit in all of baseball. I truly believe that. And a lot of fans, I think, truly believed that was going to supplement the bullpen. It was going to help the starting rotation, because really all you were asking out of your starters was to give you 6 innings of work, and then you just hand it off to Holderman, Chapman, and Bednar in whatever order that you wanted to, with Bednar being the closer more often than not. And that was going to be the way to win games. And through much of the beginning of the season, you kind of saw glimpses of the struggles that would eventually come, but you didn't see the struggles early on that you saw in August that eventually took this team out of contention from those guys that you were hoping were going to be those players that you could rely on, that you could go back on and say, okay, when we need a win late in the 9th inning and we're winning by a run or we're down a run, we can depend on these guys. And that just didn't happen. And that's what happened over that 10-game stretch of games where they played the Diamondbacks, the Padres, the Dodgers, and everybody they lost to during that stretch, is this bullpen just flat out fell apart. Like, for instance, Colin Holderman, folks, for all the hate that Colin Holderman got this year, which is warranted, he had a terrible week coming out of the All-Star break. He had a terrible couple weeks, and then we just never saw him again because of that. And you would be shocked to go to Baseball Reference, which one of the best websites of all time, to see that Colin Holderman ended the season with a 3.16 ERA. Folks, right before I hit the record button this morning, and I was like, okay, let's go look at some stats here, see what I can bring up on the show, write some notes. Whenever that popped up, I said, there's no way. I had to fact check it 5 different ways that Colin Holderman had a 3.16 ERA on the season. That's nuts. Truthfully, it just is. And you look around the rest of the group, and I won't mention everybody, but I'll mention guys that I think will be a part of this unit next year. Kyle Nicholas, 3.95 ERA. Not great, not terrible, not substantially good, not substantially bad. Carmen Mlodzinski, 3.38 ERA. You'll take that. Luis Ortiz, kind of removing him from talking about him in the bullpen now, just because I think going into 2025, he will be a rotation arm to at least begin the season. Maybe if he gets pushed out and becomes a long relief arm, you can continue it. But he had a 3.32 ERA in 37 complete games, 22 appearances in the bullpen, 15 starts. Dennis Santana, one of the bigger surprises that we saw in 2024, had a 2.44 ERA in 39 appearances. I didn't think he was going to be that good at all. He ended up being that good. Hunter Stratton, hopefully safe recovery for him. 3.58. Then you look at, after that, I just don't really see anybody that I would consider players that are really going to be here next year. Like you have the Josh Flemings of the world. You have the Jalen Beeks, who was one of the trade deadline acquisitions that the Pirates made with a 3.92 ERA. But the reason why I still say that these struggles plagued this season is because they came from the worst spot. There's a difference in a bullpen, folks, and I think this is the best way to explain this. There's a difference in a bullpen struggling if it's the middle relief. Like if it's the middle relief that you're having to struggle with, like in the 6th or the 7th inning, you could fix that. And arguably the Pirates did with guys like Nicholas and Santana and Mlodzinski. But when you have problems in the back end of your bullpen, like the Pirates did this year, not only does it lose you ball games, but it also just trickles down, because then you almost feel like you have to have a guy like David Bednar be the closer because he's been an all-star before. He's done it all. But the beginning of the season, I knew something was up because David Bednar was hurt in spring training. And on opening day, he was not available, but they did not put him on the IL. So one could make the argument that David Bednar was never healthy this year. At no point was David Bednar ever healthy. You can make that argument. And that could be a large reason why he had a 5.77 ERA, a negative 0.9 WAR, and was just absolutely awful this year and only had 23 saves when he could have very easily had like 30-something. But it just plagued everything because in those games in August, the bullpen, even the offense, was giving the bullpen help. The starting rotation, which had been strong all season, wasn't as strong in that stretch in August of losing 10 games in a row, and the offense was picking it up. It wasn't like everything was bad, but there were games that they were winning, folks, in the 8th, the 9th. They were winning those games, and the Pirates just could not close them out. And next thing you know, instead of being, 4 games back, they ended up being like 10. And now you're like, well, that's it. There's nothing else we can do. The season's a wash. And of course, it ends up being a wash because they have the exact same record as they did last season with a much better starting pitching staff. I would argue on paper, at least a much better bullpen and just a better team all around. But again, when the top half, like the back end of your bullpen struggles, folks, it gets tough because then you're asking everybody in that bullpen to be prepared to be in big, high leverage situations. And some of them just aren't capable of doing that yet. And it just sucked to watch because, again, David Bednar specifically is a guy that we've seen be an all-star, be one of the best closers in baseball, and just dominate. And this year, he just fell off a cliff. But I don't think that it's going to be that bad going into next season. We're going to talk about that later, too. But before we talk about that, there's an interesting case to be had about bringing back Aroldis Chapman after a strong season from the veteran who will be a free agent. But do the Pirates at least pursue any idea of bringing him back in 2025? We'll discuss next on Locked On Pirates. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Because, folks, Game Time Picks is here for you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets right now. Because Game Time Picks allows you to curate and make it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. All-in pricing shows the total for you up front when you toggle it with no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off, and download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. What time is it? It's game time. And welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. It's still the off-season. We're full off-season mode here on the Locked On Pirates podcast with the NLCS and the ALCS currently going on right now. And Paul Francis Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully over at Locked On MLB, is covering everything still going on in baseball's postseason. So after you listen to this today, make sure you go listen to Sully over at Locked On MLB. So when you're talking about this bullpen in 2024, it is actually kind of difficult to not bring up Aroldis Chapman, who eventually slid into the closer role later in the season due to David Bednar being removed from said role. And whenever that signing was made, I was definitely a little hesitant because the Pirates spent a pretty hefty chunk of change to bring in Aroldis Chapman. And even if the Pirates were a contending team, which at the time they were at the deadline, they were right there, I even thought that they would still move on from him just to get something for him, considering it was just a one-year deal. And you consider it all, and you're like, okay, they hold on to him. And I wondered, because the market for relievers was crazy this year. Absolutely bonkers. Like, I mean, all the buying teams needed bullpen help. Every team did. And every team does. But to not move on from him, I was like, okay, well, there's a decision. And he eventually slides into the closer role. And folks, he was just very good this year. I know a lot of people have their gripes about Aroldis Chapman and the kind of guy he is and what kind of player he is and how sporadic he can be at times, where he'll walk 3 in a row and then strike out 3 in a row at 104 mile an hour. But he had a very good season. He was a positive WAR player at .4. He had a 3.79 ERA, which was very comparable to what he saw in Texas and Kansas City last year combined, and tied his career high for appearances in a regular season with 68. And you just look at what kind of player he is and what he offers. Again, I mean, 61 2/3 innings, 26 earned runs on the season, which was the most that he's ever allowed, but that's also because it was tied for the most appearances he ever had, and he is also much older. Nearly 100 strikeouts. And you start to have an argument about Aroldis Chapman and bringing him back and what you do with the potential of bringing him back. How much is it going to cost you? What incentive does it have to bring him back? Do you truthfully want to bring him back? And there's an argument here because, yeah, you have young pieces in this bullpen, like I've already mentioned, like Carmen Mlodzinski and Kyle Nicholas and, you know, even a Dennis Santana to a degree. Who's a little bit, he's not young, but he's younger. And you have pieces there. But for me, and bringing back Aroldis Chapman, you're obviously taking a gamble on that in his age 38 season, he's going to be the same kind of player that he was this year. You probably have the mentality of a one-year deal again. So in theory, you could still get something for him at the deadline if you wanted to in bringing him back. And I don't see really any major negative to it unless he just absolutely hit that wall that everybody's expected him to hit with his age at some point. But I don't see it happening. I just don't. He hasn't hit it in his long storied career. I don't think he's ever going to hit that wall. And he could be a valuable piece to what this Pirates bullpen is trying to build and what they are trying to do. It's just a matter of, do the Pirates, with their other needs across the roster, want to invest, say, I don't know, $7 or $8 million to a 38-year-old reliever when you have a clear need at first base and a clear need in the corner outfield and maybe a need at shortstop? Is that something that you really want the Pirates to do? It's a tough conversation because really the only thing that I think gets in the way of saying if you want Aroldis Chapman back or not is if you want to, or if you're comfortable giving him that money. And if you're comfortable giving him that money and he does perform, then you look great. But then if he does hit that potential wall that everybody thinks he will eventually hit, and you give him $7 to $8.5 million, then you look like an idiot because then it's going to be harder to trade him. So it's a tough decision for sure. But these are also the tough decisions that a winning team has to make. Is, do we bring back the guy that did really well that we brought in that's going to hit free agency that we decided not to move on from? Or do we bring him back and hope that he gives us the same production? Now, there will be other players that will emerge as potential options in the bullpen. Johan Oviedo could be one. He could be a guy that slides into a bullpen role. We've already seen Luis Ortiz do it and have success doing it. So maybe you see Luis Ortiz slide back into that role again. So maybe you don't need Aroldis Chapman. But when you look at where the struggles with this team were, especially with this unit in particular, you see that it was all in the back end of the bullpen. And back end bullpen help, no matter where you get it, is going to be expensive. Be it free agency, be it trades. So do you want to thrust a Carmen Mlodzinski or a Kyle Nicholas into a back-end bullpen role that they just really haven't ever had to save some money for other stuff? Because then you're also taking another risk of what if they don't fit into those roles and the only good guys you have in the back end are Holderman and Bednar. It's a tough up and down. And I'd love to hear what you guys think because I would bring him back. I just would. I don't care what the price tag is because I think that it allows you flexibility in the bullpen again. I think it allows you to have just that hopeful three-headed monster eventually come around because we saw glimpses of that, especially from Aroldis Chapman. It's just a matter of, do we get it if we bring him back? And the finances, I think, are the biggest hurdle here for bringing Chapman back, but we'll see. I mean, I would bring him back. I think he has a really good chance to come back to Pittsburgh again, have success, do something really well. And that's something that I could see the Pirates doing because it also seemed like he enjoyed being here because they didn't move on from him. So what does that say to you? I don't know. But he had one of the best seasons that he's had in a while and proved that he could obviously go through a full season mostly healthy. So why not? Why not dabble in bringing him back? Is bringing Chapman back a big piece in why I think the bullpen will be better in 2025? We're going to discuss more about the guys that will actually be here, but my answer may surprise you. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make sure you go to FanDuel.com right now because you got the NFL, you got baseball, hockey just started, and basketball's right around the corner. College football. You got everything you can bet on FanDuel right now, and you can get a big return on FanDuel right now, America's #1 sports book. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can bet on the NLCS and the ALCS right now. Again, you got Steeler football you can bet on. They play the two New York teams in the next two primetime games on Sunday and Monday night. So if you're feeling a little bit of a hunch with the betting, make sure you go to FanDuel right now. And welcome back, everybody, to the final part of today's episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates, every single day. Thank you again for dealing with the scheduling issues as I was on vacation. You'll be getting 5 days a week until they tell me not to. So thank you so much for tuning in, folks. I appreciate it very much. And when we're talking about the bullpen, we've talked now about pretty much everything. But I truly do believe, folks, that this is a group that will be much, much better in 2025 for a multitude of reasons. The first being, one, you're hoping you get David Bednar healthy, which I believe will happen. I don't think he's going to be the same player that we saw really struggle this season, especially if he's healthy. You also saw the issue that he had with potentially tipping his pitches. That was another big issue. On top of that, you may also be getting a guy like Dauri Moreta back from injury. Moreta really did good when he was here from the Kevin Newman trade from Cincinnati. Had some success, just sadly ended up getting hurt, and that kind of derailed all that for him. But you consider that injuries played a big part in this and always will. Injuries will always play a big part in this. Colin Holderman, for instance, a lot of struggles down the second half of the season. You want to see that go away. But they have options. They have guys that, to me, can't be as bad as they were this year. And they're only going to be not, I won't say per se better, but should be more efficient, I think, is what you're hoping for from this bullpen next year, is you just hope that you get that efficiency. And if you want to say that a good bullpen matters, folks, like a lot. And if you have anybody in your life that says it doesn't, well, if you look at the ALCS right now, go look at the Cleveland Guardians, who have one of the best bullpens I've seen in a very long time. I mean, I wouldn't even be mad if Emmanuel Clase got a Cy Young vote with how good he's been in Cleveland. And if this bullpen can be a strong force behind what I expect from my last player review show to be a very strong and a very tight-knit starting rotation, then you really start to wonder just how high that ceiling goes that I talk about with this team. Because we know the offense has had its struggles too, and that's where we'll be moving on to with this player review series after this show. Pitching is done. But this bullpen being good, I think, is one of the more important things that the Pirates need in 25. They need all-star David Bednar to come back to form. They need Colin Holderman to be one of the better eighth-inning setup guys in the league. They need these things. These are just things they flat out need. And if they can get these things from the bullpen, then they're going to be fine. And that's what you hope for, and that's what you're seeking. Now, there's no guarantee that it happens, obviously. There's no guarantee that David Bednar gets better. Maybe this was just him getting exposed. Who the hell knows? But this bullpen, I have a lot of faith in it. You should have a lot of faith in it. And we'll see. We're going to end today's show talking a little bit about the playoffs. The Mets got killed in game 1 of the NLCS. Come back in very strong fashion and beat the Dodgers to tie that series up. The Yankees got out to a lead against Cleveland 5-2. Had a 4-0 lead through 4 innings. That's really the recipe to beat the Guardians. If you can have a lead late against Cleveland, or early, against Cleveland, and not allow them to get that kind of lead and allow that bullpen to go strong, then New York might dominate this series. And they have Garrett Cole going tonight against Cleveland with a potential chance to get a stranglehold on that series. Meanwhile, the Mets and the Dodgers don't play again until Wednesday, obviously traveling to New York. And Severino and Buehler, I'm worried about this Dodgers team. I know what they did against San Diego. I know that the Padres had them on the ropes and all the other things and blah, blah, blah. But this pitching staff, man, the Dodgers, and I said this in my player review series, that a lot of teams would trade places with the Pirates right now for starting pitching. And with the injuries and everything that LA is dealing with right now, folks, I guarantee you, they would love to have Paul Skeens, Jared Jones, and Mitch Keller and Ortiz and Falter right now. Because if they had that, they'd win the World Series. But their starting pitching scares me. And the Mets are just on a heater, folks. And it's more proof that just getting into the dance will get you where you need to go. And you always got a chance. But folks, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Locked On Pirates here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team, your Pittsburgh Pirates every day. My name is Ethan Smith. You can find me on Twitter right there at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates for all of your news, analysis, opinions, and reactions to everything going on in the world of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Find the show on all of your podcast platforms, including YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, like, comment, subscribe, leave a review. And always remember that I'll see you on the flip side.